The winter of 1876 delivered the most vicious blizzard the Montana Territory had ever witnessed. Temperatures plunged far below zero as relentless winds drove snow in blinding sheets across the rugged landscape. It was in these merciless conditions that Abigail Winters found herself abandoned in a remote cabin, her husband's grave barely covered by the mounting snow, with precious little firewood and even less hope. As consciousness faded and death seemed inevitable, the door to her isolated cabin rattled open, revealing the silhouette of a man, half-Comanche physician Nathan Rivers, separated from his journey to the nearest settlement. What transpired in that frozen outpost would forever alter the course of two lives and challenge the deepest prejudices of an unforgiving frontier town. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The howling wind rattled the windows of the small cabin with such force that Abigail Winters was certain they would shatter at any moment. 3 days had passed since the last piece of substantial firewood had been consumed by the hungry flames, leaving her with nothing but twigs and kindling that burned too quickly to provide lasting warmth. The cabin's temperature had dropped, so low that the water in the bucket by the door had frozen solid. "Just a little longer," Abigail whispered, her chapped lips barely moving as she huddled beneath every blanket she possessed. Her voice was raspy from disuse, having spoken to no one but herself since the fever had taken Michael 4 days prior. The storm had begun that same evening, as though nature itself was conspiring to ensure her husband's impromptu burial behind the cabin would be his final resting place. She hadn't even been able to fashion a proper marker before the snow began to fall. The Montana Territory had promised them so much: abundant land, independence, a chance to build something meaningful far from the crowded streets of Philadelphia. Michael had been so certain they would thrive here, away from his domineering father and the family business he'd refused to join. "We'll make our own legacy," he'd told her, eyes bright with dreams as they'd headed west on the train last spring. Now those dreams lay buried beneath 3 feet of snow, along with the man who'd imagined them. Abigail's eyes drifted to the calendar tacked to the wall, near the small table Michael had crafted from pine boards. February 3rd, 1876. Just 7 months since they'd arrived full of hope, 3 days since Michael's death, and likely only hours before she would join him. The irony that she'd survived the difficult childbirth only to face death by freezing wasn't lost on her. Her hand instinctively moved to her abdomen, still tender from the traumatic delivery that had come 6 weeks too early. Their son, James. Michael Winters, born healthy despite the premature arrival, slept fitfully in the roughly hewn cradle beside her bed. How she had managed to keep him alive these past days was something of a miracle. Her body providing milk despite her own deteriorating condition, her arms finding strength to hold him close for precious warmth when everything else felt frozen. To the core. "I'm sorry, little one," she murmured, reaching out to touch his tiny fist. "Your father would have adored you." The baby stirred but didn't wake, his breath forming tiny visible puffs in the frigid air. Abigail forced herself to stand, ignoring the protest of her weakened limbs. There had to be something else she could burn. The small pile of kindling by the fireplace would last perhaps another hour. After that, she pushed the thought aside. She'd already broken apart one of the 2 chairs that accompanied their table, feeding the splintered pieces to the flames over the past day. The baby's cradle was too precious to consider, and the bed frame was solid oak, impossible to break apart in her condition. Moving to the window, she rubbed a small circle in the frost to peer outside. The snow continued to fall in heavy curtains, obscuring everything beyond a few feet from the cabin. Their nearest neighbors, the Burkes, lived 5 miles to the east. An impossible journey, even if she'd been at full strength, let alone in her current state with an infant. The trading post at Hollow Creek was 15 miles in the opposite direction, equally unreachable. Abigail had written to her parents in Boston when complications with her pregnancy had first appeared, but even in favorable conditions, mail took weeks to reach the eastern states. By the time anyone received word of their situation, it would be far too late. A sudden gust of wind sent a shower of snow down the chimney, momentarily dousing the feeble flames. Abigail cried out, rushing to salvage the fire, carefully arranging the remaining kindling to coax the embers back to life. As the tiny flames licked upward once more, she sank to her knees on the rough wooden floor. "Please," she whispered, though to whom she was praying, she couldn't say. Michael had been the religious one, not her. "Please, if not for me, then for James." The baby began to cry, his thin wail cutting through the constant howl of the wind. Abigail gathered him into her arms, unbuttoning her dress despite the cold, to offer him what nourishment she could. As he nursed, she hummed softly, a lullaby her own mother had sung to her as a child. Outside, the world was white fury and certain death. Inside, for these few precious moments, there existed a fragile cocoon of life, mother and child clinging to each other in defiance of the elements. Miles away, across the snow-covered plains, Dr. Nathan Rivers struggled against the relentless storm. At 36 years old, he was accustomed to harsh conditions, having grown up in this territory when it was still largely unclaimed wilderness. But even he recognized the deadly nature of this particular blizzard. "Just a little farther, Shadow," he urged his black stallion forward, leaning low over the horse's neck to shield his face from the cutting wind. They'd been traveling for hours, having left Hollow Creek just after dawn when a trapper had arrived, with news of a young couple living in an isolated cabin who might need medical assistance. The woman had been expecting a child, and with the blizzard raging for days now, the trading post owner had expressed concern. Nathan had set out immediately, medical supplies secured in his saddlebags. As Hollow Creek's only physician, and certainly its only half Comanche one, he felt a responsibility to reach those in need, regardless of the risk. Now, with daylight fading and the temperature plummeting further, he was beginning to fear he'd made a fatal miscalculation. His face, a striking blend of his father's Anglo features and his mother's Comanche heritage, was largely hidden beneath a heavy buffalo hide hood, but his dark eyes remained fixed on what he hoped was the correct direction. The landmarks he typically used for navigation had disappeared beneath the snow, and the sun had been obscured by clouds all day. Nathan's father, William Rivers, had been a military surgeon stationed at Fort Laramie in the 1830s. There, he'd met and fallen in love with Morning Dove, the daughter of a Comanche chief who'd been brought to the fort for treatment. Their union had scandalized both communities, but William had resigned his commission, established a small medical practice serving both settlers and native populations, and created a home where their son could learn the best of both worlds. From his father, Nathan had learned medicine, both conventional training through medical school in Chicago and practical experience treating everything from arrow wounds to childbirth complications. From his mother, he'd learned the healing properties of plants, the importance of treating the spirit as well as the body, and how to survive in a wilderness that could be both provider and executioner. Both his parents were gone now. His father from pneumonia 10 years ago, his mother from heartbreak shortly thereafter. Nathan had returned to the territory after completing his medical training, establishing himself as a physician willing to travel anywhere he was needed, regardless of the patient's race or standing. It was a dangerous way to live in a region still fraught with tension between settlers and native tribes, but Nathan had never felt fully at home in either world. The space between was where he existed most comfortably. Shadow suddenly nickered and jerked his head upward, pulling Nathan from his thoughts. The horse had sensed something. Nathan strained his eyes against the swirling snow, catching the faintest hint of darker shapes ahead. As they drew closer, relief flooded through him. A cabin, half buried in snowdrifts, but unmistakably human. Shelter. "Good boy," he murmured to Shadow, patting the horse's frost-covered neck. "You've found it." As they approached, Nathan noted with growing concern the absence of smoke from the chimney. In these temperatures, no one would allow their fire to die unless... He urged Shadow forward with greater urgency, circling the small structure once. A crude wooden cross poked through the snow behind the cabin, confirming his fears that death had already visited this place. Dismounting quickly, Nathan secured Shadow beneath a small lean-to attached to the cabin, offering what little protection it provided from the elements. He grabbed his medical bag from the saddlebags and made his way to the front door, his legs sinking deep into the snow with each step. He knocked firmly, calling out, "Hello inside! I'm Dr. Rivers from Hollow Creek." When no response came, he knocked again, louder this time. "Is anyone there? I've come to help." After another moment of silence, Nathan tested the door latch. It was unlocked but frozen in place. He put his shoulder against the rough-hewn wood and pushed hard, breaking through the ice that had sealed it shut. The door swung inward with a groan of protest. The interior of the cabin was dimly lit by the faintest glow of dying embers in the fireplace. As his eyes adjusted to the gloom, Nathan made out a figure huddled near the hearth, a woman clutching something to her chest. For a terrible moment, he thought he'd arrived too late. Then he saw the slight rise and fall of her shoulders as she breathed. "Ma'am," he called softly, moving toward her. "I'm a doctor." Abigail's head jerked up at the sound of a voice, a real voice, not the wind's howl or her own desperate murmurings. Through the haze of exhaustion and cold, she registered. A tall figure standing in her doorway, bringing with him a swirl of snow and a draught of frigid air. "Close the door," she managed to rasp, instinctively turning to shield the baby from the cold. Nathan quickly pushed the door shut behind him, securing the latch, then hurried to where Abigail knelt. The fire was nearly out, and the temperature inside the cabin couldn't have been much higher than outside. Death by freezing was minutes, not hours away. "My name is Dr. Nathan Rivers," he said, setting his medical bag on the floor. "I've come from Hollow Creek. How long has the fire been?" This low, Abigail stared up at him, trying to process the sudden appearance of another human being after days of solitude and encroaching death. "Hours," she finally answered. "No wood left." Her eyes drifted to the bundle in her arms. "My baby. Please, help my baby." Nathan's medical training took over. "First, we need heat," he said firmly. He glanced around the cabin, quickly assessing his options. "Is there anything left to burn? Furniture? Books?" "The chair." Abigail nodded toward the splintered remains of what had once been a dining chair. "Already used one. Nothing else I could break." Without hesitation, Nathan moved to the small table, flipping it onto its side and delivering a powerful kick to one of the legs. The wood cracked, but didn't break. He kicked again, harder, and was rewarded with a satisfying snap as the leg broke. "Free. This will do for now," he said, quickly breaking the table leg into smaller pieces and carefully arranging them over the embers. He bent close, blowing gently until tiny flames began to lick upward. "I have more supplies on my horse. Once this catches properly, I'll bring them in." As the flames grew stronger, Nathan turned his attention to Abigail and the infant. Even in the dim light, he could see that both were dangerously cold. The woman's lips had a bluish tinge, and her face was frighteningly pale. "May I?" he asked. Reaching toward the baby, Abigail hesitated, then nodded, allowing this stranger to carefully take James from her arms. Nathan unwrapped the blanket just enough to place 2 fingers against the infant's chest, counting the heartbeats. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. His heart rate is slow but steady, Nathan reported, rewrapping the tiny boy securely. How old is he? 3 days, Abigail whispered. Born during the storm. Nathan's eyebrows rose in surprise. You delivered him yourself? Abigail shook her head slightly. My husband helped. Then the fever took him. Her voice broke. I buried him out back. Understanding dawned in Nathan's eyes as he recalled the snow-covered cross. I'm sorry for your loss, he said quietly, with genuine compassion in his voice. He gently placed the baby back in Abigail's arms. What's your name? Abigail Winters, she replied. My son is James. Mrs. Winters, James needs warmth immediately, as do you, Nathan said, his tone gentle but urgent. I'm going to bring in more supplies from my horse, then I'll need to examine both of you. Is that all right? Abigail nodded weakly, too exhausted to do anything but trust this unexpected savior. As Nathan moved back toward the door, she called after him, Doctor, thank you for coming. Just doing my job, Mrs. Winters, he replied with a slight smile. Try to stay awake until I return. Outside, the storm continued unabated, but Nathan moved with practiced efficiency, retrieving his bedroll, extra blankets, and a small sack of emergency provisions from Shadow's saddlebags. The stallion had been well trained to endure harsh conditions, but even he would need better shelter soon. When Nathan re-entered the cabin, he found Abigail struggling to remain conscious, her head drooping forward over the baby. He quickly closed the door against the howling wind and moved to her side, setting down his supplies. Mrs. Winters, he said firmly, placing a hand on her shoulder. Abigail, I need you to stay with me. Her eyes fluttered open, focusing on his face with effort. For the first time, she truly saw the man who had appeared like an answered prayer. His features were striking, high cheekbones and copper-toned skin speaking to his native heritage, while the shape of his nose and jaw suggested European ancestry. His long black hair was pulled back from his face, revealing intelligent dark eyes that assessed her condition with professional concern. You're Indian, she murmured, the observation slipping out before she could stop it. Half, Nathan replied, matter-of-factly, used to such reactions. My father was a military surgeon, my mother Comanche. Now let me help you to the bed where you'll be more comfortable. Without waiting for a response, he gently lifted Abigail, baby and all, into his arms and carried them to the small bed against the far wall. He arranged his own thick bedroll over the existing blankets, creating a nest of warmth. I'm going to examine the baby first, Nathan explained, taking James carefully. Then you. As the fire began to burn more steadily, casting a warm glow throughout the cabin, Nathan conducted a thorough examination of the newborn. Despite his premature arrival and the harsh conditions, James appeared remarkably resilient, cold but not dangerously so, somewhat underweight but with good muscle tone and reflexes. He's stronger than he looks, Nathan commented, a note of admiration in his voice. You've done well keeping him alive, Mrs. Winters. Abigail, she corrected softly. Please call me Abigail. Nathan nodded, rewrapping the baby and placing him in a small depression in the blankets next to his mother. Abigail, then, I need to examine you now. With efficient yet respectful movements, Nathan checked her pulse, breathing and temperature. His fingers gently probed her abdomen, checking for complications from the recent birth. Abigail winced slightly, but didn't protest. You're suffering from exhaustion and the early stages of hypothermia, he diagnosed. And there's some inflammation. That concerns me. Have you been in pain? Some, Abigail admitted. But I couldn't think about that. James needed me. Nathan nodded, understanding her priorities. You need rest, warmth, and nourishment. I'll prepare something for you to eat, and I have medicines that will help with the inflammation. He moved to the fireplace adding more of the broken table to the flames before retrieving a small pot from his supplies. He filled it with clean snow from just outside the door, set it to melt over the fire, and added dried meat and herbs from his provisions. As he worked, Abigail watched him through half-closed eyes. "How did you find us?" she asked. "No one even knows we're out here except the Burkes, and they're miles away." "A trapper stopped at Hollow Creek this morning," Nathan explained, stirring the makeshift stew. "Said he'd passed this way before. The worst of the storm hit, and remembered a young couple had settled here. With the blizzard lasting so long, Samuel, he owns the trading post, was concerned. Asked if I'd check on you when I mentioned I was heading this direction." "You were traveling in this?" Abigail asked incredulously, gesturing toward the window where snow continued to beat against the glass. Nathan's mouth curved in a slight smile. "I was returning from the Blackfoot settlement to the north. They had a measles outbreak, needed medicines and care." "You treat Indians?" The question slipped out before Abigail could stop it, immediately making her flush with embarrassment. At how it sounded, if Nathan was offended, he didn't show it. "I treat people, Mrs. Winters. Abigail. Illness doesn't discriminate based on race, and neither do I." There was no reproach in his tone, just a simple statement of fact. Abigail found herself studying him with new interest as he continued preparing. The stew. His movements were assured and economical, nothing wasted. Despite his frontier clothing, buckskins beneath a heavy wool coat, there was an undeniable air of education and refinement about him. "The University of Chicago," he said, catching her curious gaze. "That's where I received my medical training, if you were wondering." A hint of amusement colored his voice. "Though some of my most useful knowledge came from my mother and the tribal healers." The stew began to simmer, filling the cabin with a savory aroma that made Abigail realize how long it had been since she'd eaten properly. Her stomach growled audibly, prompting a small smile from Nathan. "Almost ready," he assured her. "It's simple but nutritious." As he ladled the hot stew into a cup and brought it to her bedside, James began to fuss, his tiny face scrunching up, as he prepared to cry. "He's hungry," Abigail explained, shifting to take him into her arms. Nathan nodded, discreetly turning away to give her privacy as she prepared to nurse the infant. "The stew will help with your milk production," he said, his back still turned. "And I have herbs that can increase it further if necessary." "Thank you," Abigail said softly, the simple words encompassing far more than gratitude for the meal, or the medicinal knowledge. "We would have died tonight if you hadn't come." Nathan turned back to face her, his expression solemn. "You don't need to thank me. Anyone would have done the same." But they both knew that wasn't true. Few men would have ventured out in such conditions, risking their own lives for strangers who might already be beyond help. Fewer still would have known how to save them if they'd tried. As the storm raged on outside, the small cabin grew gradually warmer. Nathan continued to feed the fire with pieces of the dismantled table, knowing they would need to find a more sustainable solution if the blizzard didn't abate soon. He prepared medicinal tea using herbs from his supplies, encouraging Abigail to drink it to reduce inflammation and restore her strength. Night fell, turning the windows into black mirrors that reflected the scene within. A woman and her newborn child, saved from certain death by the unexpected arrival of a man who walked between two worlds. None of them could have predicted how their lives would intertwine beyond this night, or how the residents of Hollow Creek would react when they learned of the arrangement that necessity had forced upon them. For now, it was enough that they had survived another day in the merciless winter of the Montana Territory. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but they would face them together, the widowed mother, the half-Comanche doctor, and the infant whose very existence seemed a defiance of the odds stacked against him. Abigail's head jerked up at the sound of a voice, real and human, not the wind's howl that had been her only companion for days. Through the haze of exhaustion and cold, she registered a tall figure standing before her, snow still clinging to his buffalo hide coat. "Close the door," she managed to rasp, instinctively shielding the baby from the draft. Nathan quickly secured the door against the howling storm, then knelt beside her. His medical instincts took over as he assessed the dire situation, the nearly extinguished fire, the dangerous chill permeating the cabin, and the weakened condition of both mother and child. "The fire first," he said decisively, moving to the hearth. Within minutes, Nathan had broken apart the remaining chair and carefully coaxed the dying embers back to life. As the flames grew stronger, casting a warm glow throughout the small cabin, he turned his full attention to his patients. The examination revealed what he feared. Abigail was suffering from the early stages of hypothermia, exhaustion, and inflammation. From the recent childbirth, the infant miraculously seemed more resilient, though clearly underweight from his premature arrival. "You both need warmth and nourishment immediately," Nathan stated, his voice calm but authoritative, as he wrapped them in the thick blankets he'd carried in his pack. While a makeshift stew simmered over the revitalized fire, Nathan prepared a medicinal tea from herbs in his supplies. "This will help with the inflammation and restore some of your strength," he explained, helping Abigail sit up to drink. The hot liquid spread through her body like life itself, thawing the deadly cold that had settled in her bones. As warmth and hope gradually returned, Abigail studied the man who had appeared like an answered prayer. In the improved light, she could now clearly see the distinctive features that marked his mixed heritage. The copper-toned skin and high cheekbones of his Comanche ancestry blended harmoniously with features that spoke of European descent. His long black hair was tied back neatly, and his hands, steady and gentle as they tended to her and James, bore the calluses of frontier life alongside the precision of medical training. "How did you know it was coming?" she asked, her voice still weak but steadier than before. "A trapper stopped at Hollow Creek this morning," Nathan explained, checking James's vital signs again. "Mentioned a young couple who had settled out this away. With the blizzard raging so long, there was concern. You risked your life for strangers," Abigail observed, the enormity of his actions dawning on her. Nathan shrugged slightly, uncomfortable with the implied heroism. "It's what any doctor would do," but they both knew that wasn't true. Few physicians would have ventured out in such conditions, and fewer still would have had the skills to navigate the treacherous landscape. As night deepened and the storm showed no signs of abating, Nathan set about making the cabin habitable. For the days ahead, the broken furniture would provide fuel for only so long. After ensuring Abigail and James were comfortable and warming steadily, he ventured out to bring in more supplies from his horse and to check the small woodshed attached to the cabin, which he found nearly empty. When he returned, Abigail was sitting up slightly, James asleep in her arms. Her eyes followed Nathan as he efficiently organized their resources. "Your husband," Nathan began carefully, arranging wood near the fire to dry. "The fever took him recently?" Abigail's throat tightened. 4 days ago. It came on suddenly after James was born. By the next morning he was... She couldn't complete the sentence. Nathan nodded, understanding both her grief and the practical implications. "And you've been alone since then, trying to keep the fire going and care for a newborn." "It wasn't a question, but," Abigail answered. "Anyway, the storm started the day Michael fell ill. By the time he..." She swallowed hard. "By then, the snow was too deep to go for help. I thought perhaps it would pass quickly, but this is no ordinary blizzard," Nathan agreed, adding another piece of wood to the fire. "It may last several more days." The gravity of their situation hung in the air between them. Without Nathan's arrival, Abigail and James would have frozen to death before morning. Even now, survival wasn't guaranteed if the storm continued unabated. "Tell me about yourself," Nathan suggested, recognizing that conversation might help distract Abigail from both physical discomfort and emotional distress. "How did you come to be in Montana Territory?" Perhaps it was the warmth slowly returning to her body, or the relief of having another human being to talk to after days of isolation and fear, but Abigail found herself eager to share her story. "Michael and I came from Philadelphia 7 months ago," she began, adjusting James against her shoulder. "Michael was the second son of a prominent banking family. His older brother was groomed to take over the business, while Michael was expected to become a lawyer or enter politics." A faint smile crossed her face at the memory. But Michael always had different dreams. He wanted to build something with his hands, to work the land, to live by his own rules rather than society's expectations. His father called it youthful rebellion, but it was more than that. Nathan listened attentively as he continued his preparations, recognizing the therapeutic value of allowing Abigail to speak of her husband. "We met at a literary society meeting," she continued. "I was a teacher at a girls' school, the daughter of a professor and a concert pianist. My parents were disappointed when I chose Michael over the assistant headmaster position I'd been offered." Her expression grew distant. Michael was so passionate about the West. He'd read everything he could find about the territories, talked about the opportunities for those willing to work hard and face the challenges. When we married last year, his family essentially disowned him for choosing me over the match they'd arranged with a shipping magnate's daughter. Nathan nodded, understanding the weight of family expectations. "My father was disowned by his family as well, for marrying my mother." This revelation created an unexpected connection between them. Abigail studied him with renewed interest. Was it difficult, growing up between two worlds? Nathan considered the question, while measuring herbs for another medicinal preparation. Yes and no. Within our home there was harmony. My father respected my mother's culture and traditions, and she embraced much of his. But outside, he shrugged slightly. "The world prefers clear boundaries. You're either one thing or another. And you were neither, yet both," Abigail observed. "Precisely. To white society I was the Indian doctor, tolerated for my skills but never fully accepted. To the Comanche I was the white medicine man's son, respected for my knowledge but always slightly apart." His matter-of-fact tone held no self-pity, just a clear-eyed assessment of his position in the complex social dynamics of the frontier. "How did you come to be a doctor?" Abigail asked, genuinely curious. A small smile played at the corners of Nathan's mouth. "That was never in question. I was surrounded by healing traditions from birth. My father with his surgical instruments and medical texts, my mother with her extensive knowledge of plants and spiritual healing practices." He checked the stew simmering over the fire. "My father taught me anatomy and physiology when other boys were learning their alphabets. By 12, I could fix a broken bone and stitch a wound. My mother showed me which plants could reduce fever, ease pain, or draw out infection." "But your formal training? You mentioned Chicago." Nathan nodded. "My father believed I would need credentials to practice in the white world. He saved for years to send me to medical school. I was the only mixed-blood student in my class, and one of only 2 who had practical experience treating gunshot wounds and arrow injuries before our first formal lesson." Abigail tried to imagine it. This man who moved with such confidence through the Montana wilderness, sitting in a classroom filled with young men from privileged backgrounds who had likely never treated anything more serious than a paper cut. Was it worth it, the formal education? "Absolutely," Nathan replied without hesitation. "My father was right. The degree gives me standing in certain circles that my skills alone would not, and there was much to learn from Western medicine that complemented my mother's teachings." He brought a cup of the stew to Abigail. "Here, you need to eat. The baby depends on your strength." As Abigail sipped the surprisingly flavorful broth, Nathan checked on James again, his large hands gentle. As they examined the tiny infant, "He's warming nicely," Nathan reported. "His heart rate is stronger too. You've given him an excellent start, despite the circumstances." "Michael was so proud," Abigail said softly, memories flooding back. "When James arrived early, we were terrified. But Michael never showed it. He just took charge, heated water, prepared clean linens, remembered everything the midwife had told us during her visit last month." Her voice broke slightly. "He held James first, counted his fingers and toes, proclaimed him perfect despite his size. Then he placed him on my chest and said, 'You did it, Abby. You brought our son into the world.' That was the last truly happy moment we shared before the fever struck." Nathan remained respectfully silent, allowing her the space to process her grief. After a moment, he asked gently, "The midwife from Hollow Creek visited you?" Abigail nodded. "Mrs. Rawlins. She came in December when the weather was still manageable. She told us the baby might come early based on certain signs and gave us instructions on what to do if she couldn't reach us in time." "Martha Rawlins is a skilled midwife," Nathan acknowledged. "She and I have worked together on difficult cases." She mentioned a doctor in the area, but said he was often away treating patients in remote settlements. "That must have been you." Nathan nodded. "My practice takes me wherever I'm needed. The territorial boundaries that matter so much to politicians mean little when someone is injured or ill." This pragmatic approach to his calling spoke volumes about the man. In a region where tensions between settlers and indigenous populations frequently erupted into violence, Nathan Rivers crossed boundaries that others found impassable, treating patients regardless of their origin or allegiance. "The people of Hollow Creek," Abigail began hesitantly. "Do they accept you? As their doctor, I mean." A shadow crossed Nathan's face briefly. "Some do, without reservation. Others seek my care only when alternatives aren't available. A few refuse altogether, preferring to risk death rather than be treated by someone of mixed blood." The candid assessment hung in the air between them. Abigail felt a surge of indignation on his behalf, followed by a sobering realization. Had she encountered Nathan under different circumstances, might she too have hesitated to accept his help? She had been raised in a progressive household by educated parents who espoused relatively enlightened views on race and equality. Yet even in Philadelphia, actual interaction with Native Americans had been virtually non-existent. Her knowledge came from books, newspapers, and the occasional theatrical presentation that invariably portrayed Indians as either bloodthirsty savages or noble, but doomed relics of a vanishing way of life. Now, faced with the reality of a man whose very existence defied such simplistic categorizations, Abigail felt the limitations of her understanding. This man who had risked his life to save her and James deserved more than the narrow judgment society would impose on him. "I'm grateful," she said finally, meeting his gaze directly. "Not just for the rescue, but for staying, for caring for us both so skillfully. I don't know how I can ever repay you." "There's no debt," Nathan assured her, turning back to tend the fire. "My father believed that medicine should be given freely where needed, payment accepted where possible, but never demanded where it would cause hardship." "A rare philosophy," Abigail observed. "Most doctors I've known in Philadelphia were quite adamant about their fees." Nathan smiled slightly. "My father used to say that a doctor who prioritizes payment over healing has forgotten his true purpose." As night deepened and the storm continued its assault on the small cabin, Abigail felt herself growing drowsy from the combination of warmth, food, and medication. James slept peacefully beside her, his color much improved. "Rest," Nathan encouraged, noticing her struggle to keep her eyes open. "I'll keep watch and tend the fire. But you must be exhausted too, Abigail protested weakly. You've traveled all day in the storm. I'm accustomed to going without sleep when necessary, he assured her. It's part of a doctor's life. Rest now. Both of you need to recover your strength. Unable to resist the pull of exhaustion any longer, Abigail surrendered to sleep, comforted by the knowledge that they were no longer alone in their struggle against the elements. Throughout the night, Nathan maintained his vigil, regularly checking on his patients and ensuring the fire remained strong. Outside, the blizzard raged unabated, wind howling around the cabin's corners and driving snow into drifts that nearly reached the windowsills. In the quiet hours before dawn, as Abigail and James slept soundly, Nathan took stock of their situation. The storm showed no signs of abating, and their supply of firewood, even with what he'd managed to collect from the nearly empty woodshed, would last perhaps another day at most. Food was limited to what he'd brought in his saddlebags, enough for a few days if carefully rationed. More concerning was Abigail's condition. While the immediate danger of hypothermia had passed, the inflammation from childbirth worried him. His examination had revealed signs of infection beginning to take hold. Not severe yet, but potentially dangerous without proper treatment. He had medicines that would help, but full recovery would require time and continued care. As the first pale light of dawn filtered through the snow-covered windows, Nathan made a decision. They couldn't remain in the cabin indefinitely with dwindling supplies, but attempting to travel to Hollow Creek in these conditions would be equally dangerous, especially with a weakened woman and newborn infant. He would need to find a way to secure more firewood and possibly hunt for additional food while continuing to treat Abigail's emerging infection. If the storm broke within the next few days, they might attempt the journey to town. If not, his thoughts were interrupted by a soft sound from the bed. Abigail was stirring, and James had begun to make the small movements that preceded waking. Nathan moved to check on them, his medical bag ready. "Good morning," he said quietly, as Abigail's eyes fluttered open. "How are you feeling?" Abigail took a moment to assess herself. The bone-deep chill that had pervaded her body was gone, replaced by the warmth of blankets and the renewed fire. The ache in her abdomen remained, but seemed less sharp than before. Most significantly, the fog of despair that had enveloped her for days had lifted, replaced by a cautious hope. "Better," she replied, her voice stronger than it had been the previous evening. "Much better, thanks to you." Nathan nodded, pleased with the improvement. "May I examine you again? I'm concerned about potential infection." Abigail agreed, and Nathan's careful examination confirmed his suspicions. The inflammation had progressed slightly, though the herbal remedies had slowed its advancement. "I'll prepare stronger medicine," he decided, returning to his supplies, "and will need to continue treatment regularly throughout the day." As he worked, Abigail attended to James, who had awakened fully and was demanding his breakfast with increasingly insistent cries. Nathan discreetly busied himself at the fireplace while she nursed the infant, maintaining a respectful distance that Abigail appreciated. "The storm hasn't let up," she observed, listening to the wind that continued to buffet the cabin. "No," Nathan confirmed, "and our situation here is challenging. The woodpile is nearly depleted and supplies are limited." The pragmatic assessment didn't sugarcoat their predicament, yet his tone conveyed competence rather than alarm. He had clearly faced difficult situations before and found ways to overcome them. "What do you suggest?" Abigail asked, shifting James to her shoulder to burp him. "I need to secure more firewood today," Nathan replied, bringing her a cup of freshly brewed medicinal tea. "There are trees not far from the cabin. I noticed them when I arrived. With my axe, I can fell at least one and break it down for burning." This storm?" Abigail questioned, concerned. "Is that safe?" "Safer than freezing," Nathan pointed out with a slight smile. I've worked in worse conditions. The cabin's lean-to where Shadow is sheltered was likely meant for a woodpile originally. If I can fill it today, we'll have enough fuel to last until the storm breaks. His confidence was reassuring, but Abigail couldn't help worrying. If something happened to him while he was outside gathering wood, she and James would once again face the prospect of freezing to death, a fate only temporarily postponed by his arrival. "I'll be careful," Nathan promised, reading her concern. "And I won't go far from the cabin." After ensuring that Abigail and James were comfortable and that the fire was well stocked for the immediate future, Nathan prepared to venture into the storm. He donned his heavy buffalo coat and fur-lined gloves, securing his axe and a length of rope to drag the cut wood back to the cabin. "I'll return as quickly as possible," he assured Abigail, who watched anxiously from the bed. James, cradled against her chest, continued taking the medicine every 2 hours and tried to rest. With that, he stepped out into the swirling snow, momentarily disappearing from view as the door swung shut behind him. Alone again in the cabin, but with renewed hope, Abigail gazed down at her son's face. "He'll come back," she whispered, as much to reassure herself as to promise the infant. "He'll come back, and we'll survive this together." The hours crept by with agonizing slowness as Abigail waited for Nathan's return. James had fallen asleep after nursing, his tiny features peaceful despite the howling storm outside. She had managed to take the medicine as instructed and even consumed a small portion of the remaining stew. But worry gnawed at her with each passing minute. When the cabin door finally burst open, admitting a swirl of snow and a frost-covered figure, Abigail nearly cried with relief. Nathan stomped the snow from his boots and quickly secured the door behind him, his breath visible in the chilled air. "You're back," she said, unable to keep the emotion from her voice. Nathan nodded, shedding his ice-encrusted outer garments. "With success," he replied, moving to warm himself by the fire. "There's a good stack of wood under the lean-to now, enough to last several days." "You're freezing," Abigail observed, noting his reddened face and stiff movements. "It's colder than—" "Yesterday," he acknowledged, holding his hands toward the flames, "but manageable with proper preparation." Despite his matter-of-fact tone, Abigail could see that the excursion had taken its toll. His normally fluid movements were hampered by cold, stiffened muscles, and a weariness showed in the set of his shoulders that hadn't been present before. "You should rest," she suggested. "You've been caring for us since you arrived without taking proper rest yourself." Nathan shook his head slightly. "I need to check your condition first and prepare more medicine. Then I'll consider resting." His dedication to his patient's welfare before his own comfort spoke volumes about the man's character. As he examined her with professional detachment, Abigail found herself studying his face more closely than she had previously permitted herself. The strong line of his jaw, the intelligent dark eyes focused intently on his work, the slight furrow between his brows as he assessed her condition, all painted a portrait of concentration and care. "The inflammation is responding to the treatment," he reported finally, his expression lightening somewhat. "The fever hasn't progressed, which is an excellent sign, thanks to your medicines," Abigail acknowledged. "And your own strength," Nathan countered, repacking his medical bag. "Many women would have succumbed days ago, especially after childbirth and losing a husband." The matter-of-fact assessment of what she had endured made Abigail realize just how close she and James had come to death. "I couldn't give up," she said simply. "James needed me." Nathan nodded, understanding the powerful drive of maternal protection. He'd seen it countless times in his practice, women drawing on reserves of strength they never knew they possessed when their children's welfare was at stake. "You should eat," Abigail insisted, noting that he had tended to their needs without addressing his own. "And then rest. I'm feeling much stronger now." After some persuasion, Nathan agreed to consume a portion of the stew he had prepared earlier and to take a brief rest. Abigail watched as he arranged his bedroll near the fire, maintaining a respectful distance from the bed she occupied with. "James, wake me if the baby needs anything or if you feel any change in your condition," he instructed, stretching his tall frame on the floor. "I will," Abigail promised. Within minutes, exhaustion claimed him, his breathing deepening into the regular rhythm of sleep. Only then did Abigail allow herself to fully acknowledge how profoundly this stranger had altered their fate. Without his arrival, she and James would certainly have perished, either from the cold as the fire died or from the infection that had been quietly taking hold in her body. But Nathan Rivers was far more than simply a timely rescuer. In the brief span of their acquaintance, he had demonstrated a rare combination of practical skill and compassionate care. His ability to navigate the deadly storm, to diagnose and treat medical conditions with limited resources, to secure essential firewood despite the brutal conditions, all spoke to a man of exceptional capability. Yet it was his manner that had perhaps impressed her most, the quiet confidence that never veered into arrogance. The respect with which he treated her despite her vulnerable state, the gentle hands that could wield an axe against timber one moment and cradle a newborn infant the next. As James stirred beside her, Abigail found herself wondering what Michael would have thought of the man who had saved his wife and son. Michael had been open-minded by Philadelphia standards, willing to challenge his family's rigid social expectations to marry the woman he loved. But the frontier had a way of testing even the most progressive attitudes, especially regarding relations. Between whites and Indians, the man sleeping by their fire defied easy categorization. Doctor, frontiersman, healer. These labels only captured fragments of who Nathan Rivers was. The son of a military surgeon and a Comanche healer, educated at a prestigious medical school, yet equally versed in traditional native remedies, he moved between worlds with a grace born of necessity rather than choice. James began to fuss in earnest, pulling Abigail from her reflections. She soothed him with soft words and gentle touches, careful not to wake Nathan, whose exhaustion was evident. In the depth of his slumber, as she tended to her son's needs, Abigail was struck by how much stronger she felt compared to just a day earlier. The combination of Nathan's medicines, proper nourishment, and restored warmth had pulled her back from the edge of death with remarkable speed. Outside, the storm continued unabated, a constant reminder of the precarious nature of their situation. Yet within the cabin's walls, a fragile sense of security had been established. They had heat, some food, medicines, and, most importantly, each other. No longer was Abigail facing the impossible odds alone. Now she had an ally in the struggle for survival. As the day progressed into evening, Nathan awoke refreshed and immediately set about checking on his patients and tending to the fire. The domestic routine that developed between them over the subsequent hours felt surprisingly natural. Nathan preparing simple meals and medicines, Abigail caring for James, conversations flowing easily between tasks. "Tell me about Hollow Creek," Abigail requested as they shared a meal of dried meat softened in broth. "What kind of place is it?" Nathan considered the question thoughtfully. "It's small but growing. Perhaps 30 permanent structures now, with more being built each season. The trading post is the center of everything. Samuel Griffith owns it, a fair man who treats everyone the same regardless of background." "And the people?" "A typical frontier mix," Nathan replied. "Former soldiers, failed gold prospectors who decided to try farming instead. A few educated Easterners like yourself who came seeking opportunity or adventure. There's a schoolhouse now, though no permanent teacher yet. A small church where traveling preachers stop monthly. And they accept you as their doctor," Abigail asked, recalling their previous conversation about the prejudices he sometimes faced. Most do, Nathan acknowledged. Frontier pragmatism tends to override prejudice. When medical care is scarce, Martha Rawlins, the midwife, has been particularly supportive. We often work together on difficult cases. No competition between doctor and midwife? Abigail asked with a small smile. Nathan shook his head. Martha knows more about childbirth than I ever will, and she's gracious about consulting me when complications arise. My father always said medicine should be collaborative, not competitive. Your father sounds like an unusual man. He was, Nathan agreed, a trace of sadness coloring his voice. Brilliant surgeon, terrible businessman. He could have had a lucrative practice in St. Louis or Chicago, but he chose to serve where the need was greatest instead. Like father, like son, Abigail observed quietly. Nathan looked up, momentarily surprised by the comparison. I suppose so, though I never thought of it that way. And your mother? You mentioned she was a healer among her people. A warm smile transformed Nathan's serious features. She was remarkable, knew the medicinal properties of every plant in the territory. Patients would travel for days to seek her care, both Comanche and settlers brave enough to trust her skills. They must have been very much in love, your parents, Abigail suggested, sensing the depth of his admiration for both. They were, Nathan confirmed, even when their choice to marry caused both families to reject them initially. My father used to say she was worth any price he had to pay. The sentiment resonated deeply with Abigail, reminding her of Michael's willingness to defy his family for their relationship. Love makes us brave, she murmured, almost to herself. Or foolish, Nathan added with a hint of wry humor. Depending on who's judging. The observation drew a genuine laugh from Abigail, the first since Michael's death. The sound brightened the cabin momentarily, causing Nathan to look at her with new appreciation. In that brief moment of shared understanding, something shifted between them, a connection forming that transcended their roles as doctor and patient. As evening deepened into night, the storm outside reached new levels of ferocity. Wind shrieked around the cabin corners, like a living entity seeking entrance, while snow patterned against the windows with increasing intensity. The worst storms often break after reaching peak intensity, Nathan observed, adding wood to the fire. Perhaps by morning we'll see improvement. I hope so, Abigail replied, cradling James against her shoulder after his evening feeding. Though I fear what we'll face when it does end. Nathan looked at her questioningly. Reality, she explained softly. Decisions about what comes next, where to go, how to manage alone. Understanding dawned in Nathan's eyes. You're thinking about the future. I have to, Abigail replied, gently placing the now sleeping James in his cradle. For his sake, if not my own. Our supplies here are limited. Winter is far from over, and her voice faltered, I have no experience with frontier life beyond what Michael was teaching me. Nathan nodded thoughtfully. When the storm breaks, we'll travel to Hollow Creek. You and James will be welcomed there. Frontier communities understand the importance of supporting those in need, especially widows with children. And you, Abigail asked, suddenly realizing how much she had come to rely on his steady presence in just one day. I have patients throughout the territory, Nathan replied, but my home is near Hollow Creek. I'll ensure you're safely settled before resuming my usual circuit. The practical answer should have reassured her, but Abigail found herself unsettled by the thought of Nathan returning to his normal routine while she faced rebuilding her life in an unfamiliar community. She had come to Montana as part of a couple with shared dreams. Now she would enter Hollow Creek as a widow with an infant, an object of pity and charity rather than a pioneer in her own right. What troubles you? Nathan asked, perceiving her disquiet. Abigail hesitated, uncertain how to articulate her complex emotions. I came west to build something alongside Michael, a home, a future, a legacy for our children, not to be a burden on strangers. You won't be a burden, Nathan assured her. You bring value. You're educated, you were a teacher. Hollow Creek desperately needs someone with your background. A woman alone with a newborn, trying to teach other people's children? Abigail shook her head skeptically. Even on the frontier, that seems unlikely to be accepted. Nathan fell silent, acknowledging the validity of her concern. Frontier communities could be simultaneously more flexible and more rigid than Eastern society. Pragmatic about survival needs, yet deeply conventional about social arrangements, especially those involving women and children. We'll find a solution, he said finally, one step at a time. First, we get through this storm and address your recovery. Then we reach Hollow Creek safely. After that, he spread his hands. Options will become clearer. His methodical approach to problem-solving was oddly comforting. Abigail nodded, recognizing the wisdom in focusing on immediate challenges rather than distant uncertainties. As they prepared for sleep, Nathan again on his bedroll near the fire, Abigail in the bed with James, the blizzard reached a crescendo, a fury that made conversation impossible without shouting. The entire cabin seemed to tremble under the onslaught, and despite the fire's warmth, drafts found their way through every tiny crack and crevice. Sometime in the deepest part of night, Abigail awoke to James's crying, hungry again despite having nursed just hours earlier. As she attended to him, she noticed Nathan was also awake, adding wood to the fire and checking the windows where snow had piled against the glass. "The storm?" she asked softly when James had settled again. "Still raging," Nathan confirmed, returning to his bedroll. "But we're secure here." His confidence should have been reassuring, but something in his tone alerted Abigail that all was not well. "What is it? What aren't you telling me?" Nathan sighed, reluctant to cause additional worry, but respecting her right to know their situation. "The drifts are building faster than I anticipated. If they continue at this rate, the door may be blocked by morning." The implication was clear. They could become trapped inside the cabin, unable to reach the woodpile he had laboriously built. Up under the lean-to. "Can we clear it?" Abigail asked, practical concerns overriding potential panic. "Yes, though it will be challenging," Nathan replied. "I brought sufficient wood inside to last until tomorrow. By then we'll need to create a path to the lean-to." His use of "we" rather than "I" didn't escape Abigail's notice. Despite her still recovering condition, Nathan was acknowledging that their survival might require her participation in tasks beyond caring for James. "I'll help however I can," she promised. Nathan nodded, appreciation evident in his expression. "Try to rest now. Tomorrow may demand much from both of us." As predicted, morning revealed a transformed landscape outside the cabin's frost-covered windows. Snow had piled against the door and walls, creating an almost cocoon-like effect. Daylight penetrated the glass only dimly, filtered through the white barrier that now encased much of the structure. Nathan's attempt to open the door confirmed their fears. It moved only a few inches before meeting solid resistance from the packed snow. Through the narrow gap, they could see that drifts had indeed built up well above the doorframe. "We'll need to dig out," he stated, closing the door to preserve heat. "But not immediately. The snow actually provides insulation, keeping some warmth in. Let's conserve our energy and resources until absolutely necessary." The pragmatic approach made sense, but Abigail couldn't help feeling a new wave of claustrophobia at the thought of being truly trapped within the cabin's walls. What if the snow continued to build? What if they couldn't dig out at all? Nathan seemed to read her thoughts. "This type of heavy snowfall rarely lasts more than 3 days. Already the wind seems less intense than yesterday. Soon enough, we'll be able to create a passage to the woodpile." His confidence helped steady her nerves, and Abigail focused on caring for James while Nathan inventoried their supplies. The news was sobering. Food would become an issue within days, unless Nathan could somehow hunt despite the conditions. Their water came from melted snow, at least, so that was one worry eliminated. More concerning was Abigail's medical situation. Though the infection was responding to treatment, Nathan's supply of the most effective herbs was dwindling. Without continued medication, the condition could worsen rapidly. "I need to gather more coltsfoot and echinacea," Nathan explained, frowning slightly as he examined his medicine pouch. "Both grow in this region, even in winter, if one knows where to look." "Under several feet of snow?" Abigail questioned skeptically. "Near water sources and in protected areas," Nathan clarified. "When we can dig out, I'll search." The day passed slowly, each of them attending to necessary tasks while conserving energy and resources. Nathan rigged a more effective system for melting snow for water, using a metal container suspended near but not over the fire, allowing for constant supply without wasting fuel. Abigail discovered that slow, gentle movement around the cabin actually helped with her recovery, easing the stiffness that had settled in her muscles during days of immobility. By late afternoon, a subtle change in the light filtering through the snow-covered windows suggested Nathan's prediction might be correct. The storm was beginning to abate. The constant howl of wind had diminished to occasional gusts, and the temperature seemed to have moderated slightly. "Tomorrow," Nathan declared, checking the door again. "We'll dig out tomorrow. The snow will have settled enough to hold its form when cut, making a tunnel possible." "A tunnel?" Abigail repeated, imagining burrowing through the massive drifts, like some winter creature. "Snow is an excellent building material when properly compacted," Nathan explained, his expression lightening. "My mother's people sometimes constructed emergency shelters from it during winter hunts. We'll cut blocks and create a passage to the lean-to." The unexpected reference to snow as a building material rather than simply an obstacle revealed yet another aspect of Nathan's unique background, practical knowledge gleaned from his Comanche heritage that few white settlers would possess. That evening, as they shared their carefully rationed meal, Abigail found herself wondering about the life Nathan had carved out for himself in this territory. A physician without a permanent practice, moving between communities that might never fully accept him, applying medical knowledge from two distinct traditions while belonging completely to neither. "Do you ever feel," she began, then hesitated, unsure if the question was too personal. "Feel what?" Nathan prompted, curious. "Torn between worlds," Abigail finished. "Or perhaps not belonging fully to either one." Nathan's expression grew thoughtful. "Always," he admitted. "Is the nature of being mixed blood in a world that prefers clear divisions. The Comanche see me as partly white. Whites see me as partly Comanche. Few see just me." The simple honesty of his response touched Abigail deeply. "I see you," she said softly, the words emerging before she could consider their implications. Nathan looked up, genuine surprise crossing his features, followed by something warmer. For a moment, neither spoke. The crackling fire and James's soft breathing, the only sounds in the cabin. "Thank you," he finally replied, his voice carrying a depth of feeling that belied the simple words. The moment passed, but something had undeniably shifted between them, a recognition, perhaps, that their brief association forged in crisis might be evolving into something neither had anticipated. As they prepared for another night in their snow-encased shelter, Abigail found herself contemplating what awaited them beyond the storm, when they would emerge from this isolated cocoon and face the realities of the world outside. Would the connection they had formed withstand exposure to that world, with all its prejudices and rigid expectations? Or was what they shared merely a product of extraordinary circumstances, destined to dissolve once normal life resumed? As sleep claimed her, Abigail's last conscious thought was of Nathan's face when she had said those three simple words, "I see you." The surprise in his dark eyes had revealed how rarely anyone had truly seen beyond the labels society imposed upon him. That revelation, more than anything else that had passed between them, made her understand just how lonely his path must have been, and how significant their brief intersection might prove to be for both of them. Dawn broke with unexpected brightness, sunlight reflecting off the pristine snow with almost blinding intensity. The storm had indeed passed during the night, leaving behind a transformed landscape of sweeping drifts and snow-laden trees that glittered like crystal sculptures in the morning light. "A good sign," Nathan observed, peering through the small, cleared section of window. "Clear skies mean the temperature will rise enough to make our work easier." Their task for the day was formidable: to dig a pathway through the massive snowdrift that had sealed their door and blocked access to the woodpile and Nathan's horse. Without wood, they would freeze. Without reaching shadow, Nathan couldn't retrieve additional medical supplies from his saddlebags. "I'll need your help," Nathan told Abigail as they shared a meager breakfast of the last dried meat and melted snow. "You'll need to bundle warmly and work in short bursts, returning inside frequently to warm up and rest." Abigail nodded determinedly. "James can stay wrapped in the bed while we work. He's been sleeping well between feedings." Nathan assessed her condition with a physician's eye. The infection was still present but contained, her strength notably improved from when he'd first found her. Even so, the exertion of snow clearing would tax her recovering body. "We'll be methodical," he decided. "I'll cut blocks from inside the doorway, passing them to you to stack aside. We'll create a tunnel just wide enough to pass through, conserving energy." With their plan established, they prepared for the arduous task. Abigail layered herself in every garment she possessed, while Nathan fashioned a crude snow knife from a piece of broken furniture, its edge sharpened against the cabin's stone hearth. "Ready?" he asked, when all preparations were complete. Abigail checked on James one final time, ensuring he was securely swaddled and positioned safely on the bed. "Ready," she confirmed, her breath already visible in the dropping temperature as Nathan prepared to open the door. The initial work fell entirely to Nathan, who had to force the door open against the compacted snow, then carve a space large enough to begin proper excavation. Abigail watched with admiration as he worked methodically, cutting clean blocks from the densely packed drift and passing them back to her for stacking against the cabin wall. "The Comanche have many words for snow," Nathan explained as they worked, partly to distract Abigail from the growing discomfort of cold and exertion. "Soft snow, crusted snow, snow good for tracking, snow that hides tracks. Each has its own name because each behaves differently." "And this snow?" Abigail asked, accepting another heavy block from his hands. "What would they call it?" "Piapahakat." Nathan replied, the native words flowing melodically from his lips. "Building snow, perfect for shelters because it holds its shape when cut." As they continued their labor, Abigail found herself genuinely curious about the culture that had shaped half of Nathan's identity. "Did you live with your mother's people often as a child?" Nathan nodded, carving another block with practiced efficiency. "Every summer from when I was 5 until I left for medical school. My father believed I should know both sides of my heritage." "Was it difficult, moving between such different worlds?" Nathan paused briefly, considering. "Yes and no. Children adapt quickly. The hardest part was remembering which behaviors were acceptable where. Among the Comanche, looking an elder directly in the eyes could be seen as disrespectful. In white schools, avoiding eye contact was interpreted as dishonesty or shiftiness. This glimpse into the complex navigation of cultural expectations fascinated Abigail. She had never considered how seemingly natural behaviors might carry entirely opposite meanings in different contexts. "Take a break," Nathan instructed, after they had worked steadily for nearly an hour. "Warm yourself by the fire and check on James!" Abigail didn't protest, her muscles aching from the unaccustomed labor. Inside, she found James still sleeping peacefully, his tiny face serene despite the dropping temperature in the cabin as the fire burned lower without fresh fuel. After warming herself and feeding James when he awakened, Abigail returned to find that Nathan had made remarkable progress. The tunnel now extended nearly 6 feet from the door, angling slightly toward the lean-to, where both firewood and shadow awaited. "Your turn to rest," she insisted, taking the improvised snow knife from his frost-reddened hands. "I can continue while you warm up." Nathan hesitated, clearly concerned about her exerting herself. "The infection is improving thanks to your medicines," Abigail completed firmly. "I'm stronger than I look, Dr. Rivers, and we both know this task requires both of us." A hint of admiration flickered in Nathan's eyes at her determination. "Very well, but work slowly, and stop immediately if you feel lightheaded or experience increased pain." While Nathan warmed himself inside and checked on James, Abigail continued excavating the tunnel, marveling at how the snow indeed held its shape, exactly as Nathan had described. The physical labor, though taxing, carried a certain satisfaction. Each block removed brought them closer to securing the wood they desperately needed. They alternated work sessions throughout the day, gradually extending their snow tunnel toward the lean-to. By mid-afternoon, just as Abigail's strength was beginning to flag in earnest, Nathan broke through to their destination. "We've made it," his muffled voice called back through the passage. "I can see the woodpile and shadow." The relief that flooded through Abigail was almost overwhelming. They would have heat. Nathan could retrieve his additional medical supplies, and Shadow, who had somehow survived the storm in the minimal shelter of the lean-to, represented their potential transportation to Hollow Creek when conditions allowed. With access to the woodpile secured, their immediate survival was no longer in question. That evening, with the fire blazing warmly from the newly acquired wood, Abigail felt a sense of accomplishment she hadn't experienced since arriving in Montana territory. "We did well today," Nathan acknowledged as they shared the meal he had prepared from supplies retrieved from his saddlebags. Jerky softened in broth, enriched with dried berries and a small portion of preserved cornmeal. "The tunnel will last several days at least, giving us access to the woodpile until the drifts settle naturally." "And Shadow? How is he?" Abigail inquired, genuinely concerned for the animal that had carried Nathan through the blizzard to their rescue. "Remarkably well, hungry and thirsty, but otherwise sound. Horses are more resilient than people often credit them." As they ate, Nathan revealed another piece of good news. Among his retrieved supplies were additional medicines, including more of the herbs needed to treat Abigail's infection. "We should continue your treatment for at least 5 more days, he advised. "The inflammation is improving, but complications after childbirth can recur if not fully resolved." The medical assessment carried an implicit time frame for their continued cohabitation, at least 5 more days in the isolated cabin before attempting the journey to Hollow Creek. Abigail found herself oddly relieved by this extension. Not yet ready to face the uncertain reception that awaited her in town. With their immediate needs secured, the evening conversation turned to more personal topics. As Abigail nursed James near the fire, she found herself curious about aspects of Nathan's life she hadn't yet explored. "You mentioned your practice takes you to different settlements," she began. "Do you ever wish for a more settled existence? A permanent clinic, perhaps?" Nathan considered the question thoughtfully. "Sometimes," he admitted, "particularly in winter, when traveling between patients means facing conditions like we just experienced. But a traditional practice would limit who I could help." "Because of prejudice?" Abigail asked gently. "Partly," Nathan acknowledged, "but also geography. Many who need medical care most, isolated homesteaders, native encampments, smaller settlements, would never reach a town-based clinic. By traveling, I can serve those who would otherwise go without. Your father's influence again, Abigail observed with a small smile. Prioritizing need over convenience. Or profit, Nathan added with a hint of wry humor. Town doctors generally live more comfortably than wandering physicians. Do you ever become lonely, living between communities rather than fully within any of them? The question was personal, perhaps overly so, but the extraordinary circumstances of their situation had compressed the normal timeline for such confidences. Nathan didn't seem offended, merely contemplative. Loneliness is familiar terrain, he finally replied. But purpose provides compensation. Knowing my work matters makes solitary evenings easier to bear. Abigail nodded, understanding all too well. Her decision to leave Philadelphia's comforts for the frontier had been driven by a similar desire for purpose, to build something meaningful alongside the man she loved, even at the cost of familiar connections. "And you?" Nathan asked, turning, the question back to her. "Before tragedy struck, were you finding purpose in your frontier life?" "I was beginning to," Abigail replied honestly. The initial months were challenging, learning to cook on an open hearth, washing clothes in a stream instead of sending them to a laundress, preserving food for winter. But there was satisfaction in mastering each skill, in seeing Michael's pride when I succeeded. Her voice softened at the memory. He was so patient, teaching me what he knew, learning alongside me what neither of us knew. We were creating something together, day by day, a home, a future, and now, Nathan asked gently. Abigail glanced down at James, sleeping peacefully after nursing. Now I must create a different future, one I never envisioned or prepared for. The quiet acknowledgement hung between them, a reminder of how quickly life could veer from carefully laid plans into uncharted territory. "You won't face it alone," Nathan assured her. "Frontier communities rally around those in need, especially women with children." "But at what cost?" Abigail wondered aloud. "Being the object of charity, of pity, accepting help while having little to offer in return?" "You underestimate your value," Nathan countered. "An educated woman who can teach children to read and write, Hollow Creek would consider you an asset, not a burden." His assessment was logical, but failed to address Abigail's deeper concern, the loss of independence, of equal partnership that she had shared with Michael. Accepting community support meant entering a web of obligations and expectations that might constrain her choices for herself and James. As though reading her thoughts, Nathan added, "The frontier offers freedoms unavailable in eastern cities. Conventions bend when necessity demands it. You might find opportunities here that surprise you." The conversation shifted to practical matters, when they might attempt the journey to Hollow Creek, what supplies they would need, and how best to transport James safely in winter conditions. Together they formulated a plan: 5 more days for Abigail's infection to fully clear and for the deepest snow to settle, then a careful journey by horseback, with James secured in a special carrier Nathan would fashion. "Shadow can carry both." "Of you," Nathan explained. "I'll walk alongside. We'll move slowly, stopping frequently to ensure James stays warm and properly fed." The methodical planning provided Abigail with a sense of security she had lacked since Michael's death. Having a clear path forward, however challenging, eased the formless anxiety that had plagued her during those desperate days alone. As they prepared for sleep, Abigail found herself studying Nathan covertly as he banked the fire for the night. In just 2 days, this man had transformed from mysterious rescuer to trusted ally. His competence in crisis, compassionate care, and willingness to share aspects of his dual heritage had created a connection she hadn't anticipated. The following Days established a rhythm to their shared existence. Mornings began with Nathan checking both Abigail and James, preparing medicines and ensuring the fire was well supplied. Abigail cared for James, prepared what simple meals their provisions allowed, and gradually increased her physical activities. As strength returned, Nathan spent part of each day clearing additional snow around the cabin, creating paths to the outhouse and tending to shadow. During these absences, Abigail found herself watching the door with increasing anticipation of his return, missing the quiet conversations that had become the highlight of her days. Their discussions ranged widely, from Nathan's medical training in Chicago to Abigail's experiences teaching young women in Philadelphia, from frontier survival techniques to favorite books and music. Each exchange revealed new facets of compatibility, interests and values that aligned despite their vastly different backgrounds. On the third evening after the storm, as they sat companionably by the fire, Nathan unexpectedly asked, "Would you teach me the lullaby you sing to James? The melody is beautiful." Abigail looked up in surprise. "You've been listening." "It's difficult not to be in such close quarters," Nathan replied with a hint of a smile. "The tune isn't one I recognize." "It's a Welsh lullaby," Abigail explained. "My grandmother taught it to my mother, who passed it to me. The words speak of angels watching over a child while they sleep." "Would you mind sharing it?" Nathan asked. Music was important in both my parents' cultures, though expressed quite differently. Touched by his interest, Abigail softly sang the gentle melody, the Welsh words flowing with practiced ease. When she finished, she found Nathan watching her with an expression of quiet appreciation. "The Comanche believe songs carry power," he said. "Healing songs, protection songs, songs that connect us to those who came before. Your lullaby, it carries the protection of your ancestors to your son." The observation, offered without condescension or skepticism, made Abigail realize how rare it was to encounter someone who could bridge seemingly disparate worldviews, finding connections between Welsh folklore and Comanche beliefs, between Eastern medicine and native healing traditions. "What songs did your mother teach you?" she asked, genuinely curious. Nathan hesitated, then replied, "Many. Healing songs primarily, as that was her gift. Would you like to hear one?" Abigail nodded eagerly, and Nathan began to sing in a low, melodic voice. The Comanche words were entirely unfamiliar to her, but the cadence carried its own meaning, rhythmic, soothing, imbued with purpose. It was unlike any music she had heard in Philadelphia's concert halls or churches, yet undeniably beautiful. When he finished, the cabin seemed to vibrate with the song's lingering essence. "What does it mean?" Abigail asked softly. "It asks the spirits of plants to release their healing power," Nathan explained. "My mother taught that intention matters as much as ingredients when preparing medicine." This glimpse into Comanche healing practices fascinated Abigail. "Do you find conflict between such beliefs and your medical training?" "Less than one might expect," Nathan replied thoughtfully. "Good medicine, whatever its source, respects the body's wisdom and works with it rather than against it. Where Western medicine sees only chemical properties, Comanche healing recognizes the relationship between plant and person, body and spirit, healer and patient." "And you incorporate both approaches in your practice?" Nathan nodded. "When treating fever, I might prescribe willowbark tea as any Western doctor would, but I also consider what imbalance caused the fever and address that too. Results matter more than rigid adherence to a single tradition." This practical integration of seemingly opposed medical philosophies struck Abigail as remarkably progressive. In Philadelphia, physicians generally dismissed folk remedies as superstition, while traditional healers often viewed modern medicine with suspicion. Nathan's approach transcended such divisions, taking what worked from each tradition to better serve his patients. On the fourth day after the storm, Abigail felt well enough to attempt a short venture outside the cabin. Bundled against the cold and leaning on Nathan's supportive arm, she emerged from their snow tunnel into a world transformed by winter's artistry. The breathtaking beauty of the snow-covered landscape momentarily overwhelmed her. Pristine white, fields stretching to distant tree lines, icicles hanging like crystal ornaments from pine branches, the boundless blue sky arching overhead. After days confined within the cabin's walls, the vastness felt almost disorienting. "It's beautiful," she breathed, her words forming visible puffs in the frigid air. "And dangerous," Nathan reminded gently. "Beauty and danger often coexist in this territory." The observation seemed to apply to more than just the landscape. Frontier life itself embodied that duality, offering both extraordinary freedom and ever-present peril, opportunity alongside isolation. Perhaps even their growing connection carried similar contradictions, beauty in their deepening understanding of each other, danger in the societal barriers that would soon reassert themselves. Abigail took a few tentative steps away from the cabin, testing her returning strength. The exertion left her surprisingly winded, a reminder that recovery remained incomplete despite significant improvement. "That's enough for today," Nathan suggested, noting her fatigue. "A little more each day will rebuild your stamina without risking setbacks." Inside the cabin once more, warmed by the fire and the satisfaction of this small victory, Abigail found herself contemplating their imminent departure. According to their plan, they would leave for Hollow Creek in just 2 days, if weather permitted, and her recovery continued as expected. The prospect filled her with conflicting emotions: eagerness to reach safety and stability for James, anxiety about the reception that awaited them, and an unexpected reluctance to leave the intimate world they had created within the cabin's walls. Here, necessity had suspended normal social conventions. Nathan had cared for her with professional detachment when required and respectful distance otherwise. Their conversations had flowed freely across topics that might be considered inappropriate in conventional settings. They had worked side by side, eaten from the same pot, shared the small space with a familiarity born of crisis rather than formal relationship. In Hollow Creek, everything would change. Social structure would reassert itself, along with all the prejudices and expectations Nathan had temporarily been able to set aside in their isolated sanctuary. Abigail would become the widowed newcomer in need of assistance. Nathan would return to his position as the half-Comanche doctor, respected for his skills, but never fully accepted. That evening, as James slept peacefully and the fire cast dancing shadows on the cabin walls, Abigail finally voiced the concern that had been growing within her. "What will happen when we reach Hollow Creek?" she asked, her question encompassing far more than just their physical arrival. Nathan looked up from the small piece of wood he had been carving, a toy for James, he had explained earlier. "You'll be welcomed, provided accommodation until you decide your next steps, and introduced to the community," he replied carefully. "And you?" Abigail pressed. "What becomes of—" She hesitated, uncertain how to define what had developed between them. "Our acquaintance." Nathan set aside his carving, giving the question his full attention. "That depends on many factors. Beyond our control," he acknowledged. "Hollow Creek has its own social code, unwritten but powerful. A code that wouldn't look favorably on continued association between a half-Comanche man and a white widow with an infant," Abigail stated bluntly. "Some would object," Nathan conceded. "Others might be more understanding given the circumstances of our meeting. But yes, our interaction would necessarily become more formal." The confirmation of what Abigail already intuitively understood brought a heaviness to her heart. The connection they had formed, built on mutual respect, shared challenges, and genuine appreciation for each other's qualities, would be constrained by societal expectations neither of them had created nor endorsed. "It seems unfair," she said quietly, "that what happens in the wider world should dictate something so personal." "Many things about the frontier are unfair," Nathan replied. No bitterness in his tone, merely pragmatic acceptance. "We live within those constraints while working to expand them where possible." His philosophical approach reminded Abigail of their vast, experiential differences. Nathan had navigated these complex racial and social boundaries his entire life. She was only beginning to comprehend their impact. "Will we remain friends, at least?" she asked. The question simpler than the emotions behind it. Nathan's expression softened. "I would like that very much," he replied, "within whatever parameters prove possible." The careful qualification spoke volumes about the reality they would soon face. Whatever had blossomed between them in this snowbound cabin would have to withstand the harsh light of public scrutiny and judgment. Whether it could survive such exposure remained to be seen. As they prepared for sleep on their second-to-last night in the cabin, Abigail found herself treasuring small details she had previously taken for granted. The rhythmic sound of Nathan's breathing as he slept near the fire, the security of knowing skilled medical care was within arm's reach should James need it, the comfortable silences that had developed alongside their conversations. Soon these would become memories rather than present realities. The journey ahead would bring new challenges, new relationships, new possibilities, but nothing would quite match the intensity of these days when survival itself depended on their cooperation and mutual trust. Outside, the Montana winter continued. Its icy rain, stars glittering like diamonds in the clear night sky. Inside, two people from vastly different worlds had created a temporary haven against the elements, a space where differences enhanced rather than divided, where understanding had grown alongside healing, where connection had emerged from crisis. What awaited them in Hollow Creek remained uncertain, but the foundation they had built during these extraordinary days would prove more significant than either yet realized. The morning of their departure dawned clear and cold, with a pale winter, sun casting long blue shadows across the glittering snow. Abigail stood in the doorway of the cabin, James bundled securely against her chest, taking a final look at the simple structure that had been both prison and sanctuary. "Are you ready?" Nathan asked, approaching with Shadow saddled and prepared for the journey. He had fashioned a special carrier for James, using a combination of leather straps and fur-lined blankets, a design that would keep the infant warm while allowing Abigail to nurse him when necessary. "As ready as I'll ever be," she replied, unable to fully mask her apprehension about what awaited them in Hollow Creek. Nathan helped secure James in the improvised carrier, then assisted Abigail onto Shadow's back. The stallion stood patiently, seemingly understanding the importance of his role in carrying such precious cargo. "The journey will take most of the day," Nathan explained, checking their supplies one final time. "We'll stop regularly to rest, and to ensure James stays warm." With final preparations complete, they set off through the snow-covered landscape. Nathan walked alongside Shadow, leading the horse carefully through the deepest drifts, setting a deliberate pace that wouldn't exhaust either the animal or its riders. As they traveled, the terrain gradually changed, from the isolated clearing where the cabin stood to more varied landscapes of scattered pine groves and rolling hills. Occasionally, Nathan pointed out landmarks or signs of wildlife, his intimate knowledge of the territory evident in every observation. "Deer passed through here recently," he noted, indicating barely perceptible tracks in the snow, moving toward lower elevations where browsing is easier. These small interactions, sharing knowledge, pointing out beauty or interest in their surroundings, maintained a sense of connection despite the physical focus required by their journey. They stopped at midday in the shelter of a pine grove, where Nathan built a small fire to warm them and melt snow for drinking water. As they continued their journey, the sun began its early winter descent, casting a golden glow across the snow-covered hills. Abigail, becoming increasingly exhausted despite her improved strength, found herself leaning forward against Shadow's neck for support. "Not much farther," Nathan encouraged, noticing her fatigue. "See that smoke on the horizon? That's Hollow Creek." Following his gesture, Abigail could indeed make out thin wisps of smoke rising into the clear sky, perhaps 2 miles distant. The sight brought both relief and renewed anxiety. They would soon reach safety and more comfortable shelter, but also face the social realities they had temporarily escaped in their isolated cabin. As they drew closer to the settlement, signs of human presence increased. A rough track cleared through the snow, woodpiles stacked against distant structures, even the faint sound of an axe splitting logs. Hollow Creek was coming to life before them, a frontier community carved from wilderness through sheer determination and collective effort. When they finally crested the last ridge, the full settlement spread below them. Perhaps 30 buildings of varying sizes clustered around what appeared to be a central trading post. Smoke rose from nearly every chimney, and despite the winter conditions, people moved purposefully between buildings on cleared pathways. "It's larger than I expected," Abigail remarked, taking in the scene. "It's grown considerably in the past 2 years," Nathan explained. "The railroad spur 20 miles south has brought new settlers, and there's talk of a proper sawmill by spring." Their appearance at the edge of town quickly drew notice. A man exited the trading post, shading his eyes against the snow's glare to better observe their approach. Within moments, others emerged from nearby buildings, their interest piqued by the arrival of strangers in the deep of winter. Nathan raised a hand in greeting as they reached the first structures. "Samuel," he called to the man who had first spotted them, "I've brought guests in need of shelter." The man, heavy-set, bearded, with the practical clothing of a frontier merchant, stepped forward to meet them. "Dr. Rivers, wasn't sure we'd see you again after this blizzard." His gaze moved to Abigail and the bundle secured against her chest. "Who've we got here?" "Mrs. Abigail Winters and her son James," Nathan introduced them. "Their cabin is 15 miles northwest. Her husband died shortly before the storm hit." Samuel's expression immediately softened with frontier practicality that recognized tragedy as an expected element of their harsh existence. "Mrs. Winters, welcome to Hollow Creek. I'm Samuel Griffith, owner of the trading post and unofficial mayor when decisions need making." By now, several other townspeople had gathered, their curious eyes taking in the unusual party. The half-Comanche doctor they knew, a clearly exhausted woman with an infant, and the obvious signs of a difficult journey. "Martha," Samuel called to a sturdy woman, making her way through the small crowd. "Mrs. Winters here has a newborn and has traveled far today. They'll need proper lodging." The woman, who Abigail recognized must be Martha Rawlins, the midwife Nathan had mentioned, stepped forward with practical authority. "Of course they will. Bring her to my place, Dr. Rivers. I've plenty of room and she'll need looking after." As Nathan helped Abigail dismount, her legs nearly buckled from exhaustion and the unaccustomed hours in the saddle. He caught her elbow, steadying her with a supportive grip that didn't escape the notice of several onlookers. "The child?" Martha asked, professional concern evident as she peered at the bundle against Abigail's chest. "Born during the storm," Nathan explained. "Slightly premature, but healthy and strong." Martha nodded approvingly. "Like his mother, I'd wager. Come along. Then let's get you both out of this cold." As they made their way toward Martha's home, a modest but well-maintained structure near the center of town, Abigail noticed the varied reactions of Hollow Creek's residents. Some offered sympathetic nods or murmured condolences when they learned of her widowed status. Others watched with open curiosity, likely already formulating the questions they would ask when propriety permitted. Most telling were the reactions to Nathan, a complex mixture of respect, wariness, and in some cases, poorly disguised suspicion. Several men nodded acknowledgement, but maintained a certain distance, while a few women openly smiled and greeted each other. Children stared with undisguised fascination at his distinctive appearance and the medicine pouch visible at his waist. Martha's home proved to be exactly what Abigail needed: warm, clean, and arranged with the practical efficiency of a woman, accustomed to caring for others. A fire already blazed in the hearth, and a small bedroom off the main living area was quickly prepared for Abigail and James. "You're exhausted, poor thing," Martha observed, helping Abigail remove her outer garments. "And that child needs tending to as well. Dr. Rivers, you've done well bringing them here, but now it's women's work needed." The dismissal was gentle but firm, a clear delineation of appropriate boundaries now that they had reached civilization. Nathan accepted it with a slight nod, though Abigail caught the momentary flicker of something like regret in his eyes. "I'll check on them tomorrow," he said, directing his words to Martha rather than Abigail directly, another subtle shift from their previous interaction. "Mrs. Winters still requires medicine for inflammation following childbirth." "Of course," Martha agreed. "Come by mid-morning. I'll have had time to assess them both myself by then." With that, Nathan took his leave, pausing only briefly at the door to glance back at Abigail. Their eyes met for a moment, a silent acknowledgement of all that had passed between them and the changed circumstances they now faced. Once he had gone, Martha's practical efficiency took over. She heated water for bathing, prepared a simple but nourishing meal, and examined both Abigail and James with capable hands and sharp observations. "Dr. Rivers tended you well," she acknowledged, checking Abigail's healing. "The infection's nearly cleared. His herbal remedies work wonders when properly applied." "He saved our lives," Abigail stated simply. "We would have frozen to death without his intervention." Martha nodded, unsurprised. "That's his way. Goes where others won't, helps. Those others might pass by." She paused, studying Abigail's face carefully. "Found him an unusual sort, did you?" The question carried layers of meaning Abigail immediately recognized. "I found him to be an excellent physician and a compassionate human being," she replied. Evenly, Martha's eyes crinkled slightly at the careful response. "Indeed he is, both those things and more besides." She helped Abigail into the freshly prepared bed, then added with studied casualness, "Hollow Creek has its share of opinions about Dr. Rivers, as you'll soon discover. Some well-founded, others less so. You'd be wise to listen more than speak, until you've taken the measure of things." The advice, though cryptically delivered, was clearly meant as a kindness, a warning about the complex social waters Abigail would need to navigate. "Thank you," she said sincerely, "for the guidance and for your hospitality." "Think nothing of it," Martha replied briskly. "Frontier folk look after each other. It's how we survive." She checked on James one final time, then prepared to leave Abigail to rest. "Sleep now. Tomorrow will bring plenty of visitors, all curious about our newest arrival." Martha's prediction proved accurate. By mid-morning the following day, a steady stream of Hollow Creek's residents found reasons to stop by the midwife's home, their genuine offers of assistance barely disguising their curiosity about the widow rescued by the half-Comanche doctor. Abigail met each visitor with dignified gratitude, sharing only the essential details of her ordeal while deflecting more intrusive questions with polite vagueness. She quickly identified the social hierarchy of the small community, from Samuel Griffith and his wife Elizabeth at the top to various shopkeepers, farmers, and tradespeople who formed the backbone of Hollow Creek's economy. Most significant was Reverend William Harlow, the town's preacher, who arrived late morning with his wife Constance in tow. Unlike the traveling circuit preachers common to frontier settlements, Reverend Harlow resided permanently in Hollow Creek, a sign of the community's growing stability and prosperity. "Mrs. Winters," he greeted her with solemn formality, "we were most distressed to learn of your tragic circumstances. Please accept our condolences for your loss and our assurances that Hollow Creek stands ready to assist you in this difficult time." His wife, a thin woman with sharp features and watchful eyes, examined Abigail with undisguised assessment. "Such a blessing that Dr. Rivers found you when he did," she remarked. "The Lord works in mysterious ways, bringing help from unexpected quarters." The subtle emphasis on unexpected conveyed volumes about her attitude toward Nathan. Abigail maintained a neutral expression, unwilling to be drawn into revealing her own feelings on the matter. "Indeed, I'm grateful for Providence guiding Dr. Rivers to our cabin," she replied carefully. "Without his medical knowledge, neither James nor I would have survived." Reverend Harlow cleared his throat. "Yes, well, Rivers has his uses, certainly. His unusual background provides him skills that benefit our community, though, of course, we pray for his complete conversion to the true faith." This casual dismissal of Nathan's heritage as something to be overcome rather than valued stirred a protective indignation in Abigail, but she suppressed it, recognizing the importance of establishing herself cautiously in this new community. "I found Dr. Rivers to be the most knowledgeable," she observed mildly. "His understanding of both traditional and modern medicine proved invaluable in our situation." The conversation shifted to practical matters. How long Abigail might stay with Martha, what assistance she might require, whether she had family back east who should be notified of her circumstances. Throughout, Abigail maintained a careful balance between grateful recipients of their concern and independent women, with her own decision-making capacity. Shortly after the Harlows departed, Nathan arrived as promised to check on his patients. The difference in his demeanor was immediately apparent. Gone was the easy familiarity of their cabin days, replaced by professional courtesy and a certain careful distance. "Mrs. Winters," he greeted her formally. "How are you feeling today?" "Much improved, Dr. Rivers," Abigail replied, matching his tone while searching his face for the connection they had established during their shared ordeal. It was still there, visible in his eyes, but now carefully contained behind the mask of the physician attending the patient. Martha hovered nearby during the examination, her presence ensuring propriety was maintained. Nathan checked Abigail's, healing with clinical efficiency, then examined James with gentle thoroughness, pronouncing the infant remarkably resilient for one so young. "The infection has cleared," he informed both women, "but I'd recommend continuing the herbal tea for 3 more days as a precaution." He handed Martha a small packet of dried herbs with instructions for preparation. As he prepared to leave, an awkward moment hung between them. So much remained unsaid, so many shared experiences now relegated to memory rather than acknowledged. Openly, in the structured social environment of Hollow Creek, their brief but intense connection had no defined category or accepted expression. "Thank you, Dr. Rivers," Abigail finally said, infusing the formal words with genuine feeling. "For everything." Nathan's expression softened marginally. "You're welcome, Mrs. Winters. Should you need anything further, Martha knows where to find me." After he departed, Martha studied Abigail thoughtfully, but made no comment on the subtle currents she had undoubtedly observed. Instead, she returned to practical matters. "You'll need proper clothing for yourself and the baby. Elizabeth Griffith mentioned bringing some things this afternoon that might suit." The following days established a new routine for Abigail and James. Martha proved an ideal hostess, supportive without being intrusive, offering practical assistance and social guidance while respecting Abigail's independence. James thrived in the stable environment, gaining weight and strength visibly with each passing day. Hollow Creek's residents generally showed remarkable generosity, bringing food, baby items, and offers of assistance that demonstrated the frontier spirit of communal support. Yet beneath these genuine kindnesses, Abigail detected currents of expectation, assumptions about her future plans, her intended role in the community, even how long her mourning period should last before considering a new marriage. "Widow with a child won't lack for suitors here," Martha observed bluntly one evening as they sat by the fire after James had been put to bed. "Already seen Bradley Cooper watching the house more than coincidence explains. And Frank Wilson suddenly found reasons to visit the trading post daily, despite living 3 miles out." Abigail looked up from her mending, startled by the directness. "Surely they understand I'm in mourning. Michael has been gone barely 3 weeks. Martha shrugged. "Pragmatically. Frontier has different timelines than back east. Survival demands practicality. Woman alone with a child needs protection and provision. Man alone needs someone to keep house and provide comfort. Mathematics of frontier life are simple that way." The stark assessment made Abigail uncomfortably aware of her vulnerable position. Without family, without independent financial means, her options were indeed limited. Teaching might provide some income eventually, but establishing herself would take time, and immediate needs pressed more urgently. "And what of other considerations?" Abigail asked carefully. "If a woman had unconventional preferences regarding potential suitors?" Martha's shrewd gaze met hers. "Depends on how unconventional," she replied evenly. "Some boundaries flex here out of necessity. Others remain rigid no matter the circumstances." She paused, then added significantly, "Particularly those concerning certain distinctions of birth." The implicit warning was clear. Whatever connection had formed between Abigail and Nathan during their snowbound days, pursuing it openly in Hollow Creek would invite consequences neither might be prepared to face. As if summoned by their veiled discussion, a knock sounded at the door. Martha rose to answer it, returning moments later with Nathan behind her. Unlike his previous visits, he was not carrying his medical bag, signaling this was not a professional call. "Dr. Rivers," Abigail acknowledged, instinctively straightening her posture, suddenly conscious of her simple dress and loosely pinned hair. "Mrs. Winters," he replied with a slight nod. "I hope I'm not intruding at this hour. I've brought something for James." He extended a small package wrapped in soft leather. Martha, demonstrating a tactfulness Abigail hadn't expected, murmured something about checking on a sleeping draught she was brewing and disappeared into the back room, leaving them in a semblance of privacy. Abigail accepted the package, their fingers brushing momentarily in the exchange. Unwrapping the leather, she found an exquisitely carved wooden rattle, its handle smooth to perfection, small polished stones enclosed within a hollow sphere that would make a gentle sound when shaken. "It's beautiful," she said softly, genuinely, moved by the thoughtfulness of the gift. "You made this," Nathan nodded. "It's a traditional design. Comanche mothers give similar rattles to their children. The sounds soothe, while the motion develops coordination." The cultural significance of the gift wasn't lost on Abigail. This wasn't merely a toy, but a connection to heritage, to traditions that Nathan clearly valued despite the pressures to reject. His Comanche background. "Thank you," she said, meeting his eyes directly. "It means a great deal that you would share this with James." Something unspoken passed between them, an acknowledgement of the bond formed during their isolated days together, and its complicated existence in their current reality. Nathan seemed about to say more when the front door burst open without warning. Samuel Griffith entered, his normally affable expression replaced by grim urgency. "Rivers, thank God you're here. There's been an accident at Wilson's farm. His boy fell from the hayloft. Broken bones, maybe worse. They're bringing him in by wagon now." The transformation in Nathan was instantaneous. Personal considerations vanished, replaced by professional focus. "How long ago? Is he conscious? Any visible bleeding?" The rapid questions came as he was already moving toward the door. "About an hour. Barely conscious when they set out." "Don't know about bleeding," Samuel replied, struggling to keep pace. At the threshold, Nathan paused briefly, glancing back at Abigail. Their eyes met in a moment of connection that transcended the social constraints surrounding them. Then he was gone, rushing to meet his patient, leaving Abigail holding the carved rattle and confronting the reality of her place in this frontier community, and his. Martha emerged from the back room, her expression revealing she had heard the commotion. "Poor Wilson boy," she sighed. "Lively child, always climbing where he shouldn't." She noticed the carved rattle in Abigail's hands, but made no comment, merely raising an eyebrow slightly. "Will they blame him?" Abigail asked quietly. "If the boy doesn't recover fully?" Martha understood immediately who they meant. "Some might," she acknowledged, looking for reasons to reinforce what they already believe. "Others know Rivers is the best chance that boy has." She settled back into her chair by the fire. "That's Hollow Creek for you, just like anywhere else, I suppose. Some hearts open to what's different, others close tighter at the sight of it." As Abigail carefully placed the rattle in James's cradle, she wondered which category her own heart belonged to, and what prices might be paid for that determination. 2 weeks passed, during which Abigail gradually integrated into Hollow Creek's daily rhythms. Martha's home continued to provide sanctuary, though Abigail increasingly felt the need to establish her own independence. James thrived under the combined attention of both women, growing stronger daily, his curious eyes tracking movement and responding to voices with growing recognition. Abigail used this time to assess her options carefully. Samuel Griffith had mentioned a small vacant cabin at the settlement's edge, modest but sound, that could be hers for minimal rent if she were interested in establishing a small school for the community's children. The proposition tempted her, offering both purpose and a path to self-sufficiency, yet complications remained. The cabin would require significant work before being habitable, especially in winter conditions. Securing sufficient firewood alone presented a formidable challenge for a woman with an infant and limited physical strength. These practical obstacles colored every plan she considered. Nathan's presence in her life had become simultaneously more structured and more scrutinized. He continued to check on James professionally, his visits now limited to brief medical assessments conducted under Martha's watchful eye. Their conversations remained confined to health matters, the easy exchange of ideas they had enjoyed in the isolated cabin now buried beneath layers of social propriety. The Wilson boy's accident had unexpectedly altered some dynamics, however. Under Nathan's skilled care, the child had survived what might have been a fatal injury, his broken bones set with precision. Internal bleeding stopped through a combination of Western medical techniques and Comanche herbal applications that reduced swelling and prevented infection. The grateful parents had publicly praised Nathan's skills, temporarily dampening some of the settlement's more vocal critics. This reprieve allowed Abigail to observe the complex social currents surrounding the half-Comanche doctor with greater clarity. On a crisp February morning, as Abigail helped Martha prepare breakfast, a sharp knock at the door interrupted their routine. Opening it revealed Elizabeth Griffith, the trading post owner's wife, her expression tense despite her attempts at a pleasant greeting. "Martha, Mrs. Winters," she acknowledged them quickly. "You're needed at the meeting hall. The town council has convened an emergency session." "Whatever for?" Martha asked, wiping her hands on her apron. Elizabeth hesitated, her eyes flicking briefly to Abigail. "Better you hear it there. It concerns recent events." The vague explanation sent a chill through Abigail that had nothing to do with the winter morning. "Is it about James?" she asked, immediately concerned for her son. "Not directly," Elizabeth replied. "Please, just come quickly. Bring the baby. Mrs. Harlow has offered to mind him during the proceedings." The mention of the preacher's wife only increased Abigail's unease. She quickly bundled James in his warmest blankets, while Martha donned her coat and scarf. The meeting hall, a simple structure that served as church, school, and community gathering place, was nearly full when they arrived. It seemed most of Hollow Creek's adult population had assembled, their expressions ranging from curiosity to grim determination. At the front of the room, a table had been arranged where Samuel Griffith, Reverend Harlow, and 3 other men Abigail recognized. As prominent citizens sat in judgment-like formation, Nathan stood to one side, his face impassive, though tension showed in his posture. He met Abigail's questioning gaze briefly before looking away, revealing nothing. "Ah, Mrs. Winters," Samuel called, gesturing her forward. "Please join us. This matter concerns you directly." With growing apprehension, Abigail handed James to Constance Harlow, who accepted the infant with a tight-lipped nod, then made her way to the indicated position near the front. Martha followed, positioning herself supportively behind Abigail's right shoulder. "We've called this meeting to address a matter of community concern," Samuel began once everyone had settled. "Information has reached us regarding the exact nature of Mrs. Winters' rescue and subsequent situation that requires public clarification." Reverend Harlow leaned forward, his expression severe. "Mrs. Winters, is it true that you and Dr. Rivers spent 6 days and nights alone together in your cabin before traveling to Hollow Creek?" The blunt question, delivered in a tone that suggested moral transgression, sent a ripple of murmurs through the gathered crowd. Abigail felt heat rise to her cheeks, not from shame, but indignation at the implied impropriety. "Dr. Rivers saved my life and my son's life during the worst blizzard in recent memory," she replied evenly. "We would have frozen to death without his intervention and medical care." "That doesn't answer the question, Mrs. Winters," Reverend Harlow pressed. "Did you, a recently widowed woman, share accommodations unchaperoned with Dr. Rivers for nearly a week?" Before Abigail could respond, Nathan stepped forward. "I treated Mrs. Winters for post-childbirth infection and hypothermia," he stated firmly. "As her physician, I was obligated to remain until her condition stabilized and travel became possible. I maintained professional conduct throughout." "No one questions your medical intervention, Rivers," one of the other council members interjected. "It's the extended cohabitation that concerns us." Abigail straightened her spine, finding her voice. "The blizzard made departure impossible. We were snowbound with drifts higher than the door. Dr. Rivers behaved with absolute propriety at all times, maintaining appropriate distance except when medical care required otherwise." Despite her clear explanation, skeptical expressions remained. On several faces, Reverend Harlow's wife, bouncing James gently in her arms, spoke up from her seat. "Even with the purest intentions, appearances matter. The reputation of our growing community cannot withstand scandal." Samuel Griffith raised his hands, calming the increasing murmurs. "No one is suggesting impropriety occurred," he clarified, though his tone suggested otherwise. "But we must consider how this situation appears, especially as news travels to neighboring settlements." "What exactly is being suggested?" Martha demanded, her practical nature cutting through the veiled implications. Reverend Harlow cleared his throat. "The council has deliberated and believes there is only one solution that preserves Mrs. Winters's reputation and the community's moral standing. He paused significantly. Marriage. The single word hung in the air like a thunderclap. Abigail felt as though the floor had suddenly tilted beneath her feet. Marriage? She repeated incredulously. You're suggesting I should marry because of unfounded gossip about a situation where survival was the only consideration. Not just any marriage, Samuel clarified, looking uncomfortable but determined. Given the circumstances, the council believes you should marry Dr. Rivers to resolve the appearance of impropriety. A stunned silence fell over the room. Nathan's expression had gone completely rigid, his eyes fixed on some middle distance, revealing nothing of his thoughts on this extraordinary proposal. This is outrageous, Martha declared, breaking the silence. You men with your notions of propriety, have you considered what you're actually proposing? Forcing a half-Comanche man to marry a white widow with a newborn infant? The very thing most of you whisper against when you think no one's listening. Her blunt assessment exposed the hypocrisy underlying the council's solution. They would condemn any natural development of the relationship between Abigail and Nathan based on racial differences, yet would mandate marriage between them to avoid scandal. The situation is unique, Samuel acknowledged uncomfortably, but the alternative is worse. Already rumors have reached Wilson's Landing about the widow rescued by the Indian doctor. Questions are being asked that could damage both Mrs. Winters's standing and our community's reputation. Abigail found her voice, anger cutting through shock. So to prevent gossip about something that never happened, you would force two people into a lifetime commitment against their will. Not against their will necessarily, Reverend Harlow interjected smoothly. Perhaps Dr. Rivers would like to express his thoughts on the matter. All eyes turned to Nathan, who had remained silent through the exchange. He stepped forward, his composure intact, though Abigail could sense the tightly controlled anger beneath his calm exterior. I have the highest respect for Mrs. Winters, he stated carefully. Her courage and determination during our ordeal were remarkable. But marriage is a serious commitment that should result from mutual choice, not community pressure. His diplomatic response, neither accepting nor outright rejecting the proposal, seemed to frustrate the council members who had clearly expected either immediate compliance or angry refusal. There are practical benefits to consider, another council member suggested. Mrs. Winters needs establishment and support for herself and her child. Dr. Rivers has a home but lacks family. Arrangements of convenience are not uncommon on the frontier. And what of children? Martha challenged bluntly. Are you suggesting Mrs. Winters should bear mixed-blood children when most of you wouldn't allow your own to play with such offspring? Or would this be a marriage in name only? Another hypocrisy to maintain appearances. The uncomfortable shifting among several council members revealed Martha had struck a nerve. The contradiction was becoming increasingly apparent. They would force this marriage to maintain appearances while simultaneously expecting it to remain unconsummated, to prevent the complication of mixed-race children. Abigail felt a wave of clarity wash over her as she observed the discomfort her situation had created. These people were not malicious. Most genuinely believed they were offering a practical solution to a difficult circumstance. Yet their worldview was so constrained by convention and prejudice that they couldn't see the fundamental injustice of their proposal. May I speak with Dr. Rivers privately before any decision is made? She requested, her voice steady despite her inner turmoil. After a moment's hesitation, Samuel nodded. You may use the anteroom, but understand, Mrs. Winters, the council's recommendation stands regardless. Without marriage, your position here becomes untenable. The threat was thinly veiled, comply or leave, with Winter still gripping the territory and a young infant to protect. Leaving wasn't truly an option. The council knew this, using her vulnerable position as leverage. In the small anteroom, Abigail and Nathan stood facing each other for the first time without witnesses since their arrival in Hollow Creek. The carefully maintained distance between them suddenly seemed both necessary and absurd, given the circumstances. "I'm sorry," Nathan said quietly. "This was precisely what I feared might happen when we reached civilization." "You anticipated this?" Abigail asked, surprised. "Not exactly this scenario, but something similar. Frontier communities operate with rigid codes beneath their apparent freedom. Survival depends on conformity in certain matters." Abigail studied his face, searching for his true feelings behind the careful neutrality. "What do you want, Nathan? Not what you're willing to accept, but what you actually want." The use of his given name, avoided during all their public interactions in Hollow Creek, seemed to break something open between them. His formal demeanor softened, revealing a glimpse of the man she had come to know during their isolated days. "What I want," he replied slowly, "has never been the determining factor in my life. Being mixed blood means living within constraints, accepting limitations others don't face." "That doesn't answer my question," Abigail pressed gently. Nathan met her gaze directly, allowing her to see the conflict within him. "I admire you greatly, Abigail. Your courage, your intelligence, your devotion to your son. Under different circumstances, I might have—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I might have hoped for a connection allowed to develop naturally, without coercion or public scrutiny." The honest admission touched Abigail deeply. In their snowbound sanctuary, something genuine had indeed begun between them, a connection based on mutual respect and growing affection that might, given time and freedom, have evolved into something more. "And now," she asked quietly, "with these circumstances forced upon us?" "Now we must be practical," Nathan replied, regret evident in his tone. "If you refuse this arrangement, the council will make your life here impossible. With an infant to protect and winter far from over, you have few alternatives. And you, what consequences will you face if you refuse?" Nathan's expression revealed he hadn't expected her to consider his position. "They can't easily drive me out. My medical skills are too valuable. But they can isolate me further, restrict my practice, make it difficult for patients to reach me without facing community censure." The reality of their situation settled between them, both trapped by conventions neither had created nor endorsed, both vulnerable in different ways to the power of community judgment. "There's another consideration," Nathan added carefully. "If we agree to this arrangement, it need not be conventional. We could establish a household that functions practically while maintaining personal boundaries. In time, when circumstances allow, other arrangements might be possible." Abigail understood his meaning. A marriage of convenience now could potentially be dissolved later, when her position was more secure, when James was older, when alternatives existed beyond immediate compliance or dangerous exile, a temporary solution to an immediate problem, she summarized. Nathan nodded. "One that provides you security, and James a stable environment, while allowing both of us to maintain our dignity and independence within private boundaries." The proposal, pragmatic and respectful, reflected Nathan's character, finding a path that acknowledged reality while preserving essential freedoms. Yet Abigail couldn't help feeling that something precious was being lost in this transaction, the possibility of a relationship based on choice rather than necessity. "Is that truly what you want?" she asked again, needing certainty before committing to this path. Nathan's expression softened further. "What I want is your well-being, and James's security. If this arrangement achieves that, then yes, it's what I want. The rest—" He made a small gesture with his hand. "The rest can be determined as we go forward." His answer, both practical and deeply caring, helped Abigail reach her decision. They would face this challenge as they had faced the blizzard, with mutual respect, clear communication, and a focus on survival first, with deeper questions addressed when circumstances permitted. When they returned to the meeting hall, the expectant hush that fell over the gathered crowd revealed how invested the community had become in their private dilemma. Samuel Griffith rose, his expression questioning. "We have reached an understanding," Abigail announced, her voice clear and composed. "Dr. Rivers and I will marry, with certain conditions regarding our household arrangements that will remain private between us." Reverend Harlow appeared ready to object to the concept of conditions, but Samuel quickly interjected. "Excellent! A sensible resolution all around. The ceremony can be performed this Sunday after services." 3 days from now? Abigail questioned, the rapid timeline catching her off guard. "No sense delaying," Reverend Harlow stated firmly. "The sooner this matter is resolved, the better for all concerned." As the meeting disbanded, with townspeople already buzzing about the upcoming wedding, Martha approached Abigail with concern etched on her practical features. "Are you certain about this, child? Forced marriages rarely bring happiness." Abigail looked across the room, where Nathan stood in conversation with Samuel, his posture once again formal, the necessary public mask back in place. "It's a practical arrangement," she replied carefully, "one that serves immediate needs while allowing for evolution as circumstances change." Martha followed her gaze, understanding dawning in her shrewd eyes. "Ah, a frontier solution to a frontier problem. Well, if anyone can navigate such complex waters, it's you two." She squeezed Abigail's hand supportively. "Just remember, appearances may dictate the beginning, but what grows behind closed doors is your own business." The following days passed in a whirlwind of preparations. Elizabeth Griffith organized a proper dress for the occasion, while other women contributed small decorations for the meeting hall and refreshments for the modest celebration to follow. Throughout, Abigail maintained composed dignity, accepting congratulations with appropriate gratitude while revealing nothing of the arrangement's true nature. Nathan, meanwhile, prepared his home for new occupants. His cabin, located slightly removed from the main settlement, was larger and better constructed than Abigail had imagined, a testament to his skills beyond medicine. He added a small, separate bedroom for James, installed a cooking stove Martha had arranged as a wedding gift, and reorganized his medical supplies to accommodate family living. On Sunday morning, with pale winter sunlight streaming through the meeting hall windows, Abigail stood beside Nathan as Reverend Harlow performed the ceremony with perfunctory efficiency. James, held by Martha in the front row, watched with wide, curious eyes, too young to understand the significance of the moment that would shape his future. The vows, though standard in wording, carried layers of private meaning between the two. Speaking them, for better or worse, acknowledged the unconventional beginning of their union. In sickness and health, recalled the medical care that had formed their initial bond. Until death do us part remained to be defined within the privacy of their own understanding. When Reverend Harlow pronounced them husband and wife, a palpable release of tension rippled through the gathered community. The potential scandal had been contained, propriety maintained, social order preserved. Few present recognized the quiet revolution occurring beneath these appearances. Two individuals from vastly different worlds creating their own definition of partnership outside society's rigid expectations. As they left the meeting hall amid scattered rice and well-wishes, Nathan offered Abigail his arm. Placing her hand on his sleeve, she felt the solid strength that had carried her through blizzard conditions, the same reliable support now accompanying her into an uncertain future. "Ready?" he asked quietly, the single word encompassing far more than just their departure from the ceremony. "Yes," Abigail replied with equal simplicity, James secure in her other arm. Together, they walked toward Nathan's waiting horse and cart, toward the cabin that would become their shared home, toward a life neither had anticipated, but both now faced with characteristic determination and quiet courage. Behind them, Hollow Creek continued its frontier existence, largely unaware that, within its rigid social framework, something unprecedented had taken root, a marriage founded on mutual respect rather than convention, bridging worlds considered unbridgeable, creating its own definitions of family and belonging that would, in time, challenge the very constraints that had forced its creation. As they reached the edge of town, Abigail glanced back once at the settlement that had simultaneously offered sanctuary and ultimatum. Then she turned forward, facing the path ahead with the same resilience that had allowed her to survive blizzard, loss, and now this unexpected turn of fate. The winter sun caught the simple gold band now encircling her finger, a symbol with meanings yet to be fully defined, but offering the promise of shelter against life's storms, just as Nathan had once appeared at her cabin door when all hope seemed lost. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.